Hello and welcome to yet another interesting conversation. I am Alex Bolboaca. I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and my guest today is somebody who has done a lot of work for the communities of developers and for developers. She's a polyglot programmer, an author, a speaker, a technical agile coach. She's published multiple books and has created a number of code bases that are used around the world in helping developers learning more about various technical practices, mostly refactoring, but not only. Welcome, Emily Bache.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I like to start these conversations with the origin story of my guests. How did you end up in programming? What attracted you to this domain?
Well, I went into programming straight after university. Well, I had a degree in engineering from Cambridge University, and I was married to this guy, Jeff, who was a programmer. He's been programming since he's like 13. So he encouraged me to look at this as an option. And I found when I looked that there were a lot of jobs in programming at the time. This was 98. And there were less jobs in kind of more engineering kind of roles. So I applied for software jobs, and I was lucky enough to get one. So I haven't really looked back, honestly.
Okay. So you started as an engineer, and then you tried looking into programming. It was as you are saying, it was mainly about the jobs, or was something more?
Well, of course, Jeff encouraged me because he explained that it's really creative and fun. I hadn't really thought about software at all. I mean, I'd done a few programming courses as part of the engineering degree, so I'd seen code and I knew a bit, but it was really his influence, I guess, that got me to take it seriously. And then just the job market was really, everyone was looking for people to do programming at the time. It was actually not very difficult to find a job in software then. And I discovered I really liked it, and it is really creative, and you use lots of interaction with people, and plays to all my strengths. So yeah, it turned out to be a good choice.
And you ended up learning a bunch of programming languages.
Yeah, I did. I was really lucky, actually. Basically my first job, it was a Java programming job, and they said in the first week, oh, and by the way, we do some JPython as well. So I was right in there learning Python and Java in my first job, and those two languages have been the main ones I've used throughout my career, actually, although I've done a lot of other stuff as well. So I wasn't ever a monoglot programmer, really.
But it's quite interesting because I'm sure you've met the type of programmer which I think is quite common in our industry, who knows one programming language, stays in one technology. I'm the same as you. I like to explore different programming languages. So what drove you to learn more than just one?
Oh, that's a good question. So as I say, I mean, Java and Python were needed in it was my second job. My first job was C++, but that was really short. And then when I came to Sweden, I got a job doing more Java. That was in 2000. And then the next job was Python. And then, and then somehow I managed to end up in the Ruby user group. There wasn't a Python user group. So I went to the Ruby user group because it was kind of similar to Python. So I learned some Ruby. And then, eventually I changed jobs again. It was more Java. And then it was Ruby. And then it was Scala. And, and then now I'm coaching. I have to coach in whatever language the people around me are coding in. So actually, the last few months, I've been doing an awful lot of C programming, which is kind of fun because I never really did that before. and it's quite different. But yeah,
Yeah,
I really enjoy learning new programming languages. So
that's cool. So you mentioned coaching, and I'm curious how you made the transition into coaching, training, this kind of job.
well, yeah. So I've always been interested in. I mean, an early adopter. So so I discovered unit testing in like 2000 and realized it was such a useful thing to have automated unit tests for all the software I wrote. I started doing that, and of course, the people around me largely weren't. So I kind of naturally took this role of trying to persuade them that, look, if you write unit tests, it would be better for everyone. So I always had that kind of trying to mentor the people around me, at least. And then when I discovered the Coding Dojo in 2005 at a conference, and I was like, yeah, this is really fun. We can actually learn some of these skills on these fun code kata problems. So that's where I started to try and lead coding dojos. And I started out doing it on my free time in meetups and at conferences. And eventually I worked out how to turn that into a job, really. But the thing is, with the coding dojos, I got all enthusiastic about them for a few years and was doing that. And then I realized that it wasn't working very well, that people could learn TDD in the coding dojo and then completely failed to apply it at work. So I got a bit frustrated and I went back to coding full time instead, and didn't do any training for a few years. And then I met Llewellyn Falco at some conference or other, and he invited me to come and pair coach with him, and see how he was doing technical coaching. And I was really inspired by that. This was 2018. I went to the US for 2 weeks, and he showed me this coaching techniques. And part of it is the same, like similar to the coding dojos I've been doing, just like code katas, and training. And then the other part was all this ensemble working in the production code. And I was like, this combination, this actually works. So I came back from that experience thinking, right, okay, maybe I was a bit hasty finding this whole training thing. I actually really like training and coaching. Let's try doing it the same way as Llewellyn. So yeah, since then I've been doing a lot more of coaching and developing the techniques that I learned from Llewellyn. And now I've just published this book about it. So this is kind of a potted history.
Yeah, well, it's usually what happens. It's very similar with my history with code retreats. I stumbled into code retreats by happenstance and then went with them, and some things just happen. And if you are there, it's very interesting. I think it's very, very nice. So you mentioned the technical practices. I'd like to go back a bit to these, because another interesting point is when and how did you discover automated testing and test-driven development and refactoring and these practices?
Well, I guess I was just really lucky. When we first came to Sweden, I mean, the IT market was even more hot than it had been in '98 when I graduated. And I got a job really quickly and easily in Sweden, despite not speaking any Swedish. And I landed in this team that was like a startup. We were going to build a new product. So it was going to be really cool technologies. And one of the guys on the team, he read a lot of stuff. And he'd read this book on extreme programming. He said, look, we should do this. We should do extreme programming on this project. So we all read the book. All 5 of us on the team, and we were like, yeah, let's do this. So we did. And because it was completely greenfield development, startup, we had the freedom to do it, and it was such a blast, and we did such good code and had a really good time. And I was just totally sold on this way of building software. Unfortunately, the dot-com bubble burst, and the startup folded, but I had learned so much good stuff and realized that this was a better way to build software, that I basically tried to take these ways of working with me to everything I did after that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Did you have any trouble getting into something like test-driven development? Was that difficult at first?
Well, as I said, I landed in this team of very good programmers, and we picked it up, unit testing, pretty quickly. It wasn't TDD that we were doing necessarily. It was just writing unit tests. And it was over the next few years actually that I realized how to do TDD and why it is actually a bit more than just having unit tests. And it is a lot harder when you've got existing code that you're working with, and it takes skill and practice. So I wouldn't have said I was actually very good at writing unit tests when I first started, but I could see that it was a really, really useful thing to have. And I persevered, and I did code katas on my own time. I led little training sessions with my colleagues, and read lots of books to pick it up. It does take time to learn these skills, and you have to put in some effort. And I like to think that now I've got better ways to teach other people, so it doesn't take quite so much time and effort as it took me, maybe.
But I'm sure you've noticed some kind of mental blocks or mindset challenges when people are trying to adopt test-driven development. We are very used, I think, in this industry to think about the solution and to think about the solution from very early and kind of go with it and not go incrementally, not iterate too much, just trying to get everything done perfectly first shot, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I totally recognize that it's an unfamiliar way to work. It takes some time and practice to really get the hang of it.
So do you recognize these challenges in yourself back then, or it's something that somehow came naturally to you?
No, not naturally, but I persevered, and it's a little while ago now. That's the thing with being a teacher. It's about when you're teaching other people, trying to get into their heads, not make them look like I was, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to say I was a total natural and picked it up without any effort, but that's not true. But the challenges that I face picking up TDD are not necessarily the same as anyone else faced, I guess. So that's the thing with being a teacher, trying to present it in different ways so that people who are struggling with different aspects of it can all get something.
Yeah. All right. And you mentioned that this was a greenfield project, which is the best way of trying these practices and using them. But then I'm sure you got into some context where you had existing code, and it's not as easy to deal with existing code, to write tests and to refactor and so on. How was that experience for you?
Oh, maybe I should tell a story, because I came off this fantastic project and onto this big code base. So this was 2001 kind of time, 2002 maybe, and I could see that at one time it had a good design, but there'd been so many deadlines and stressed programmers working on it that the design was really suffering, and it had technical debt. And I'd read Martin Fowler's book, and I knew about refactoring. I was like, right, we should refactor this. We should restore the design. And I was so naive, and I was so out of my depth. I thought I could refactor this code all by myself, and that it was going to be fantastic, and everyone was going to thank me. So I went and sat in my room for like 3 months by myself in a branch, refactoring this code. And I thought it looked great afterwards, and I thought that I had written some unit tests, and it was, but it was just a disaster. We tried to merge it back in, and it just the merge horrors. And then, of course, I'd broken it because I wasn't skilled enough at refactoring. I'd introduced a bunch of bugs, and it all just had to be thrown away. So I kind of learned from that it's the refactoring is a skill, and you have to go about it in a good way, and you have to get your team on board with you. All these kind of things. So that was quite a formative experience for me as well, realizing that actually no, I may think I'm a young hotshot who can do everything, but no, I've got a lot to learn.
And I guess this is also one reason why you find working with teams so useful.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You can't change things all by yourself. If the software is going to be good and stay good and get better, then the whole team needs to be on board with that and have the culture and the skills to achieve it. And that's when I've worked on really rewarding teams, it's been like that. Really successful and productive teams. Yeah.
Okay. And this takes us to ensemble programming, or these kinds of groups where you can, and perhaps you can describe the concept a bit, because it's not so well known in our audience.
Yeah, some people might know it's called mob programming, but I like to say ensemble working or ensemble programming, because it just sounds so much more like what it is. It's like a group of musicians coming together to make create something beautiful, and where everyone has contributed. So that's what an ensemble of software developers working together in harmony, producing code, and learning from one another. And the idea basically is that you have one person on the keyboard who's the typist who's entering the code, but what they are typing is not what they have decided about. They're not setting the direction. That's the responsibility of the whole ensemble, with the spokesperson role being the navigator, it's also called, who is generally speaking to the typist and explaining them what code to write based on their understanding of what the ensemble has decided on. And of course, the spokesperson, the navigator, has to take input from everybody, and they get stuck. They ask for help, and people give them help. And this is a skill in itself for a group of people to learn to collaborate this way. It doesn't come completely naturally to programmers to work this way at all, which is. But once you've learned some of the skills, and I've taught this skill to many teams now, and you start to see them get it, and you start to see them appreciate, actually, we are writing better code together than I could be writing by myself. And that is actually worth so much, because code quality and good design is worth so much, that it actually could be worth all of us spending all this time together rather than working individually. This could actually be a more effective way to produce good quality software and learn from one another. I mean, that's the thing. I learn so much from the people I coach, as well, which is, it's really rewarding. It's also can be tiring, of course, and you might not want to do it all day, every day, but some teams do. But I'm just using it as a coach, as a way to get teams to collaborate more effectively, to communicate about design decisions. And then, of course, I can start to introduce the technical practices that TDD and refactoring and stuff that I know, and can help contribute that into the ensemble.
So, if I may go back a little bit, you've created a number of code bases that are very useful for refactoring, and I'm curious. I've used them lots of times in communities. I've used them and I've seen them used in communities and in trainings and at conferences and so on. So they are extremely useful. But I never asked you how you ended up creating them.
Yeah. Well, so as I said, I mean, refactoring is a skill that you need to practice to get good at, and I need to practice that and get good at it. So partly it was just me finding exercises that I found useful for myself to practice on. I think that's where I got Gilded Rose from. I got it from somebody else invented it. I just found it and I was like, oh, this is fun, but it's in C# and I need to practice refactoring in, can't remember now what language I translated it to first, probably Java. And I wanted to get it into CyberDojo, so I needed to change the starting position a little bit to get it into CyberDojo. So I basically reinvented it a bit. And translated it, and then I needed another language, and it just kind of snowballed. And that was one of the first ones I had on my site, and it's the most popular now. So that was one I found from somewhere, and then there was tennis. Is another one of my favorites. That one I was teaching a class on automated testing for testers, So these were testers who had done like an 8-week programming course or something. So they really weren't very good programmers. And I set them the tennis refactoring kata as an exercise. And 2 of the 3 tennis solutions came out of these students. It's real code written by real people. And it was just so amazingly horrendous. I was like, wow, this is a refactoring exercise. And then the 3rd one I made up myself as a kind of like evil twin. How would I write this code in the worst possible way? So that was where that one came from. So some of them have come from me seeing other people's solutions to katas and thinking, wow, that I think that's a really interesting way to solve this problem. I think it might need refactoring. Some of them came from just examples in books and me tweaking them and trying to fiddle with them and make them into something that I could work on. And some of them came from real production code bases. Often I will, so this happened for me many times now, that I come into a team and I look at their code and I'm like, wow, this code is so intricate and difficult. How on earth are we going to refactor this? And me feeling dissatisfied with how well we'd managed to do it in the ensemble, and trying to recreate that kind of problem for myself so I can practice on it, and so that next time I meet that similar kind of code, I can do it better. So some of them are basically inspired by production code that I've worked on, and like, I don't even know what to do with this. So I made it into an exercise so I can do it several times in different ways and try out different approaches, and I can put it on GitHub and other people can try it and give me some ideas what to do with this code. So yeah, it's a mixture. I just find I really enjoy little exercises like this and challenging myself to find better ways to solve them. So, and then it's just when I share it on GitHub and other people do translations for me, it's like win-win. You know, I now have a translation of this to another programming language, and I can practice it in that language instead. So that's kind of why I did it originally, so that other people could help me out with translations and also show me their solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know one thing struck me while listening to you, and I recognize the spirit of trying to get better at your job and trying to practice little bits of techniques so that you get better and better and you learn more aspects of it and so on. But I'm also conscious that oftentimes for many developers this sounds like these people have nothing better to do than to like try out various ways of, you know, programming, when for many people programming is a job. So you go there, you write your code, you go home, and you stop it. So you don't keep on practicing and so on. And I think
that's a perfectly legitimate way to be a programmer. Absolutely. Yeah. You don't have to do it on your free time to be a proper programmer or anything. No, it can be just a job. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's also interesting to perhaps go a little bit into why do you like doing these things?
Oh, well, that's a really hard question. I guess I'm ambitious and motivated, and I like to learn new things. I enjoy learning new things. I get bored easily. And I've always put in a lot of effort into my career. And I guess now I'm a coach, it's really justified, because of course I have to be a few steps ahead of the people I'm trying to coach. And I have to find in innovative and new ways for them to learn stuff and invent exercises and lessons and stuff. But this isn't something I started. I mean, I've had periods of my career where I've been just a developer in a team. And I've still found the motivation and energy to do stuff outside of that and go to conferences and meetups. Yeah, I'm not really sure why I'm like that. It's just, but I totally appreciate that not everyone is. And when I'm coaching now, a lot of the people I'm coaching are, you know, their programming is their job and they do something else in their free time. And that's great. That's fine. I'm happy to be there and helping them on their work time to learn new things, and they will progress in their careers. And that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, of course. I'm smiling because I recognize myself in your description. I get bored easily. I like to learn new stuff. I've extended my area of comfort sometimes too much, going well beyond what I would be comfortable with doing. But every time I've learned something new, it helped me extend and learn more about myself and help more people and so on. So, but if you would ask me why I'm doing that, I have no idea. I mean, it's still it's the same answer as you. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned before ensemble programming, and just one thing that I think pops up often in a training setting, it's very, very useful, obviously, because you can learn a lot from each other. But some people use this in a production setting, and that's when things get more weird for managers, because they will say, okay, so I'm paying 7 people to do the job of 1, right?
Yeah. So that's the typical reaction. 7 might be a bit large for an ensemble. I mean, I think it can work. It can be fine. But I think the sweet spot's probably near about 4 or 5 people for an ensemble. But yes, it's still the same thing. If you could produce 5 times as much with them working separately, then why wouldn't you do that? And I think the answer is not to look at productivity in terms of lines of code produced. It's about productivity is a very difficult thing to measure for programmers, and there's many aspects to it. But one thing that I'm really interested in at the moment is the research that's going on about technical debt. I saw some research that came out recently that showed that in normal industry settings, it's typical for programmers to report that they waste on technical debt, waste time up to like a quarter of their time, roughly, on average, is they're wasting due to being held up because the code is not clear and easy to understand. The design doesn't support the thing they're trying to do to it. So that's not the time they're spending cleaning up the technical debt. That's just the time they're wasting because it's there. So if you could reduce the amount of technical debt, you could seriously increase the productivity of your programmers. That's something that managers and people, technical debt's really difficult because they can't see it. And there's various tools that will attempt to measure it, but they've all got limitations, and still fundamentally managers can't see technical debt, but they can see features coming out the other end. So there's a lot of focus on, are we getting features out, and the technical debt's just racking up and up and up, and the feature delivery is just getting slower and slower and slower. And it's very hard for them once you get to that point where it's, they're spending more time on technical debt than feature delivery. Things are bad by that point. It's very difficult for the managers to make sensible decisions. What needs to happen, of course, is that you're paying off that technical debt continually. You're minimizing it, but there's a culture of improving the design constantly and being ready for those new features when they come. So that there's flexible design, and that is, I think, something that an ensemble has a much better chance of achieving than a bunch of individuals, because the ensemble, they're sharing a culture of and looking at the whole code, and they're it just seems to me that that way of working ought to promote higher quality code, less technical debt, and that could actually be a bigger impact on the productivity than most people would expect, actually. So I think these researchers who are looking at technical debt, some of them are at the university just down the road here in Gothenburg, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of their results as they research this kind of thing. I just saw they brought out a paper on mob programming as well, so they're also researching that. So I'm just like Yeah, we need some evidence that this actually works. I don't think there is much research yet on Ensemble working, but I'm hoping there will be some soon.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about technical debt. Besides the actual work aspect, when you try to work on something and you cannot because you don't find the actual place where you need to change, or you need to change in 15 places instead of one, or you don't understand the code. But I think there's also a psychological aspect, because you get frustrated, you go out and have a coffee or something just to blow out the steam. And this also gets into the way, because one thing that I noticed at least when practicing test-driven development and incremental refactoring in small steps is that I get into this flow state where I keep going and going and going, and things just keep working until I get tired. And I notice very quickly when I get tired because things stop working. So, but I can stop at that point. So I think there's also some aspect here that's not usually taken into account.
I agree. I think, yeah, this state of that the ensemble can get into a kind of state of flow and focus, in a way that can be disrupted more easily, perhaps in an individual, and as you say, that the quality of the code you're working with it's so important for a programmer, for your mental well-being, to work in an environment where you understand what's going on, and this is so invisible to people who don't read code. It's so invisible, and I think we need better ways of communicating about this to decision makers, the importance of having a good internal code quality.
Okay, so you've been working with teams also who are doing agile software development or attempting to do agile software development. Can you say a few words about the importance of technical practices in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for Pro Agile, and we're a bunch of agile coaches, and a lot of my colleagues are working with the agile processes and the team building, and having product owners who know what they're doing, and backlogs, and all this really good stuff. I'm sure it's great and needed for agile to be successful, but the technical part is what I focus on, and some of my colleagues as well. And that's, as far as I can see, I'm coming back to technical debt. In an agile method, there is going to be technical debt. It's inevitable. There's always a gap between this design that you have now, that you've built for the features that you decided on at the beginning of the sprint, and what you now realize, having got feedback on that, the design that you're going to need for the next features. So there's always going to be a technical debt. And the trouble with, if you don't have any technical practices to manage that technical debt, it just increases, and eventually it overwhelms your ability to deliver anything. And it's kind of inherent in agile methods, and people who are used to more traditional development methods don't perhaps realize that you can't sustain an agile process for the long term without technical practices. And you absolutely have to have developers who are skilled with writing tests and refactoring and all the rest of it. And that's as big a part of going agile as all the rest of what the Scrum Masters and the product owners should be doing with their time. So the developers also need to change the way they work. So that's the part that I work with.
So what are some hurdles that you notice in the adoption of these practices with the teams that you worked in the past years?
Oh, hurdles. Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, apart from the code bases themselves that often aren't just very friendly towards writing tests and have technical debt and all that, for the people as well. Some of the most difficult situations are when you have somebody who's a very experienced developer and they're looked up to in their team, and they realize that actually they don't have these skills. They're not good at writing tests or doing refactoring. And for me as a coach coming in and trying to handle the team dynamics of that, and helping them to be humble enough to realize that they can learn stuff, and that's okay. So that's one of the things that I struggle with sometimes, that dealing with the egos in the team. So I'm getting better at that. But then there's also the teams which are just broken, that people just don't like each other. They don't want to work together. They don't respect one another. And I really struggle with that. And there have been times I've said, look, I just don't want to work with this team. I think you need to sort that out first before I can help you with the technical practices. So that's can be a big problem in certain teams. Then there's just the stress. The stress that they're under. In order to learn new things, you have to be in a place where you've got a little bit of slack, mentally, if nothing else, to start taking on new ideas. And if you've got, a really hard deadline coming up and stressed customers, and you really want to do well and deliver what you said you were going to deliver, and you just can't come in and coach a team with that kind of pressure. So, and that can be frustrating as a coach, because they pull out at the last minute because they're stressed about something. And again, that's not as a technical coach, that's not something I can just solve, because that's a wider organizational problem with Agile, and that's why I need to bring in my colleagues. Really, I've got colleagues who are really good with team building and helping product owners to prioritize and cutting scope and all that stuff that you need to avoid these really stressful deadlines. But yeah, it doesn't always work. So those are the kind of barriers that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I recognize all of them. I also notice a pattern sometimes that companies tend to come to us when they are already in a crisis, when they are already late on a project, when they want to speed up, when the competition is on their heads and pushing hard and so on. And this is one of the worst times to actually try any transformation, any teaching, any mindset change, because many of these technical practices are actually have behind them a mindset change, right?
Right, and that takes a little bit of time and energy, and if all the focus is on the big problem and the deadline, then I guess I've been a bit lucky. Some of the organizations I've worked with haven't been like that. I've worked with one organization where the manager came to me and was like, we want to be the best. We want to be the best code quality, the best designs, the best skilled developers. And they were already in a good place. And that was really fun to work with them, just trying to take them to the next level. So it's not always like that. But yes, I recognize that situation too.
All right. So I know you've been working on this Salmon method for coaching, and you're also working on a book on it. I have very little knowledge of what it is, so it might be interesting to explore a bit what it's about.
Well, yeah. So actually, I finished the book. It came out in January. It's as I mentioned before, I went to pair coach with Llewellyn Falco and saw the way he was working, and I was so inspired by that. And I came back and started to work in a similar way, and I kept in touch with Llewellyn and bounced lots of ideas off him and tried stuff out. And eventually, the style of coaching that I was doing came together in something that I could describe in the book. And I had largely finished the book when I realized actually this needs a name, this coaching method. So I thought about it and came up with this Swedish word, Salmon. It means together. And I felt it was appropriate for describing this method because so much of it is ensemble working. And ensemble, of course, means together in French. So I thought it was a good name. And so the Salmon method, basically, it's a method for technical coaches, a concrete way of working with teams. And it has these two main parts, the ensemble working and the learning hour. And so as a coach, you spend your time with several different teams, potentially. But with each team, you're doing 2 hours of ensemble working, 1 learning hour on each coaching occasion. So that's like half a day. And I will put 10 of those half days of coaching together in a 2 or 3 week period. So that the team gets this kind of intensive block of time with me or another coach, at the same time as they've got enough other time that they can carry on with their normal feature work. So this enables the managers to accept it to a greater degree, because the team still has quite a lot of their time to do their normal development work, and they get some coaching in their production code as well, in the ensemble working. We're working on a real task in their backlog, often writing tests and doing a bit of refactoring. And then the learning hour is like teaching code katas, fun exercises, talking about theory. And I've learned a lot about how to do teaching well, which I've put into this. It's a planned lesson, basically, with a structure and a learning goals and interactive, engaging teaching techniques. So so I'm really believing in this as a way to help teams to learn new skills and change the culture in their production code. So the block of 10 coaching days, then I go away, then I come back and do more coaching days, and gradually over time the team actually manages to transform the way they work together. It's the kind of plan. And then there's a few more details to the Salmon method as well, which about the way you onboard teams and but that's kind of details. The main thrust of it basically is I realized that the best way to learn technical practices is that I've seen work is pair programming and code katas, like code retreats, pairing with somebody who knows TDD. And so the Salmon method is trying to take those elements and scale them so that you can do it for a team at a time rather than just one individual.
All right, that sounds very interesting, and it sounds like, based on my first time hearing it, it sounds like something that actually works. It can work.
Yeah.
Particularly, I like the mix between, let's say, the co-learning aspect, where people work together and learn from each other, with very specific focused exercises. I think that tends to be, from my experience, also very, very useful.
Yeah, good. Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I know you've got a lot of experience of teaching and training TDD and stuff as well. Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to write this method down in a book because I think it's the best thing I know that works, at least. And I wanted to make it possible for people who haven't done any technical coaching before or haven't done much to read this and understand, okay, it's not impossible. I could conceive of doing this. It's described well enough that I could perhaps try this coaching method with the teams in my organization. And that's also why I've got a website to back up the book with lots of these materials, salmoncoaching.org, which is aimed at people who are aspiring coaches, aspiring technical coaches, and there you've got lots of descriptions of code katas and learning hours and how you can put them together. And it's all released Creative Commons, so people can reuse it. They can tweak it, make it your own, reuse it, which is what works so well for open source software. So here you've got basically open source lesson plans, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds really good, and I think we need more technical coaches, because one of my observations with mindset changes in organizations is that you don't necessarily need a lot of money to make the mindset change, but you need to invest a lot of energy into the mindset change. And this energy can come from a number of different places, can come from people going outside in communities, from trainings, from coaches coming in, from external developers, or from developers who are already doing these types of practices being hired, and so that you can learn from each other. But there's no substitute for this kind of guidance that a technical coach can provide, I think. And this can help speed up quite a lot, the process.
Yeah, and I think it's this kind of career path of being a technical coach is not widely known. So I'm really interested to hear what you say. I agree with you. All those different sources of the energy needed to make a culture change. But actually having people like me who specialize in this, there's such a need for this. And there's lots of people, I think, I find it really fun doing technical coaching as well. It's a fun career choice. So I would like to encourage it as something that people should consider. If you're a developer, you've got some skills with refactoring and TDD and stuff, and you also perhaps are interested in teaching and coaching, have some desire to learn how to do that, this could be the career for you, you know?
One thing that I think of when I hear you talking about the method is there's a kind of profile that I often see, particularly, let's say, more in C++ teams, which I've been working with quite a lot, which is a very analytical type of profile, a person who requires a lot of explanations, requires a lot to understand the process, step by step, and kind of try to get it perfect very quickly, which we know it doesn't happen, but this is, there's the, let's say, learner profile, which you sometimes deal with. And I'm curious, have you seen this type of profile in the context of Salmon method?
You mean a programmer who really wants to understand the process of TDD, kind of at an intellectual and theoretical level?
Yeah.
And needs to be convinced that it's the right before they'll try it, or right?
More or less, yes. So less open to experimentation, more trying to understand and to grasp the whole, going the analytical way,
Yeah, you do. I'm just trying to think if I can pinpoint any individual who really fits that description, because I've certainly met a lot of programmers over the past few years, and but that's, I guess, where the learning hour is such a strong element in the Salmon coaching, because you do go through the arguments and the theory, and get them to see that it works in theory as well as practice. So I can't think of anyone who really absolutely fits that description. Most people are a mixture. They need to try it a bit hands-on and discuss it and understand it intellectually. So that's what the learning hour is about. There's always a hands-on part with some writing some code, and there's always some kind of theoretical discussion about how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, that sounds like, it sounds like it would work, especially if you go into the details and the arguments and all that. Yeah. So that clarifies more what the learning hour is, and I think it's very useful. All right. It's been really nice talking until now with you, and I think we can keep on talking about a lot of things, but I like to move to, let's say, the closing part of our conversation, where I like to ask 6 questions at the end to every one of our guests. And let me start with the first. What book did you like and would recommend?
Accelerate, Nicole Forsgren et al.
Can you say a few words about it?
Right, I really admire Nicole, because she's a statistician and also a developer, more on the ops side. But and the book Accelerate is about the research that she and others did over a several year period into the science of DevOps and what actually works in real companies. And they've got thousands of data points, and she actually knows how to analyze that in a good way. And the conclusions that they reached actually totally match my preconceived ideas about what works. So, of course, it's great research. But yes, it's all about the importance of using continuous delivery, psychological safety and culture, and technical practices like TDD are in there, as these things work. and you can have both stability and throughput. It's you go fastest when you go well. When you've got the highest quality is actually the fastest way to go. And yeah, so I think it's really good because it explains all that in an accessible way, and it's backed up by actual research.
Yeah, cool. Second question, is there a category of books you don't read too much, and why?
A category of books that I don't read. History. My husband Jeff, he is always reading factual books about history, and I've tried to read some of them, and it's just no. So I like reading fantasy stories, and of course, I read the odd book about programming as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Third question, is there a topic that you think is not discussed enough in our industry or in our communities?
There's lots of topics that do get discussed. Should be more, perhaps. Diversity, inclusion, ageism. I'm getting old. I don't want there to be ageism. How do we make this industry less stressful and more welcoming? The programming is so much fun. How do we make that the normal lived experience of programmers in our industry? I mean, these questions do get discussed, but I think there's a long way to go before we have solved these problems.
Yeah. Is there a topic that you think is discussed too much in industry or in our communities?
Maybe I just don't listen to those things, topics that get discussed too much. I'm trying to think. We're too obsessed with new shiny frameworks. But then I'm guilty of that too. I like new shiny programming languages. But I think that it's such a young industry. The turnover, there's so many people coming in that we're relearning so much stuff. Maybe there's just too much debate about the hottest, latest framework, which is actually just using ideas that someone already invented, and we've just forgotten about them. I don't know. I'm kind of speculating a bit here. Maybe I'm just being old.
So one interesting thing that happened to me in the past few years is that I switched from trying to write code that is just for the love of writing code to trying to solve problems. And when I did that, I started to understand that custom code is very expensive. So now I'm looking into as many ways to reduce the code that I write, and I become much more conservative in the tools that I use and so on. So I'm perfectly fine with a makefile because it worked for so long and it works now. I'm perfectly fine with Vim because it's worked for so long and it still works, despite being a weird kind of editor, which I absolutely accept. It's kind of fun to see this, contrast with where I was in the beginning of my career when I liked shiny things also. That was part of the fun.
Yeah, definitely. New things can be fun, but they also can be distracting and expensive.
Okay. Fifth question. What would be your ultimate career achievement? Something that if you do, you would say to yourself, I can retire now. Assuming you have means to retire.
Oh wow. Wow. I mean, I am ambitious. Ultimate achievements. I mean, maybe I should do something magnanimous, being recognised by my peers. But actually, I think what probably would being the CEO of a very successful software company that was using all the stuff that I've been teaching. So just to show that it really does work, and successful software businesses can be built on good technical practices. And that's yeah, I don't know. I see that as being something to aim for, showing that that I can achieve being the leader. I've always, yeah. Oh, I don't know. I'm waffling. Maybe I will found a company one day and it will be hugely successful, and then I will feel that I've made it.
Yeah, we get this type of answer a lot, because for many of our guests, it's like, I will always want to do more. So it's quite difficult to think of something, but yeah, very interesting answer. And the final question, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself?
I think I did okay. I think with most of you, do what you're doing. Read books. That was crucial. I did that. Probably now it'd be more like watch training videos, because there's so much out there on good training materials on available on video these days. And when I was a young programmer, it was all books, and I still learn very well from books. But yeah, read. There's still the wisdom of writing a book. You're buying about probably 5 to 10 years worth of that person's experience condensed into a text, and you can learn such a lot from reading.
Cool. Okay, so these were the 6 questions. Now, before we end, one thing that I like to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to tell our audience that we didn't have a chance to talk about or touch upon?
We haven't said anything in this interview about approval testing, which is one of the techniques which I find really useful, and one of the ones I teach in my technical coaching. So I just wanted to mention that TDD and refactoring, excellent technical practices. I put approval testing up there as well. It's a technique that's particularly suitable when you've got untestable kind of legacy technical debts kind of problems. And I've got training materials on it, and I'm hopefully going to be doing a course with O'Reilly actually on this style of testing. So watch out for that as well, coming out sometime in the new year.
And where can people find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter, Emily Bache, and I've got this website that I mentioned, salmoncoaching.org, and my book's available on LeanPub, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. I mean, do get in touch with me. But great to hear from other technical coaches and that kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. This has been very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you will do in the next years. You've been very prolific at producing interesting learning materials, interesting code bases, interesting books. So the only thing I can wish you is more of.
Thank you. It's been really great talking to you. And thank you so much. You've clearly prepared this interview, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you again, Emily, for being here and participating in this interview. We will be coming back with more interviews and more focus chats. This is our other type of video that we started doing. Focus chats are shorter discussions on one specific topic that we explore in more detail. We have to pay our dues to the YouTube algorithm, so please like, share, subscribe, tell other people. If you are doing an ensemble, then it might be interesting to also watch as an ensemble some of the conversations that we have done until now, and um, tell us some of your opinions in the comments or contact us directly. We are always interested in learning what you find interesting in these videos and what else you'd like to learn. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.